Homophobia. I've never experienced this before.
Fag, that's so gay, queer.
That's so gay, you're such a fag, you're such a dyke, you're such a whatever, you know?
Homophobia is an irrational fear of gay people.
Just people being afraid of things they don't know.
That anything that represents a different sexual orientation is something to be feared.
I think it's just people who are afraid of what they don't understand.
A fear of, a misunderstanding of, ignorance of anyone who is homosexual.
Homophobia. Yeah, it's fear.
People who are afraid to talk to people who are homosexuals.
And it basically is just the fear towards the LGBT community.
Afraid of the whole same-sex love relationship thing.
The fear that people have about gay people.
A person who's afraid of another person because they're different.
It's a form of social exclusion. It's a form of oppression or prejudice that pushes a particular group of people, in this case LGBT youth, to the sidelines or to the margins of society.
Actually, it was a couple weeks ago. I was walking down the street with her, and people were yelling like fags and stuff like that, and saying, "Oh, that's gross," and it's just pathetic.
Gay is one that everybody uses. I don't get dyke or lesbian really, but like sometimes butch, and I don't particularly like that term used towards myself, but
It's because they're homophobic, so they're scared of it, but I don't know, I kind of disagree with that. I don't think they're scared of homosexuals. I think it's just a general like lack of concern.
I don't know, I guess I feel like it's just not right to have homophobia. Like, I mean, obviously it isn't, because it hurts people, right? Like, hurting people is bad.
Homophobia has the impact of marginalizing people. In my profession as a teacher, for me to sense that there's a homophobic atmosphere, when children come into my classroom, they're not necessarily going to feel welcome. If in the staff room culture, a homophobic view is allowed to kind of permeate, then all of a sudden those off-the-cuff comments that some people might perceive as harmless, well, they're not really harmless. And if I let that go, then I'm allowing that to continue. And so for me, it's about, it changes the nature, it colors the nature of the environment, and to my way of thinking, poisons the environment.
It's hard to walk down a school hallway and not hear fag, dyke. Leslie's a bit passe, I think, but yeah. And usually it's a kid, or the movie was gay, the shirt is gay, the water fountain's gay.
You definitely get a lot of people just kind of walking by, or they wouldn't want to be in the same group as you, and
whether they don't like the way you act, whether they don't like the way you look, whether they don't like the way you talk. In some way, in my opinion, it has to affect that person enough for them to become so vulgar. Someone who's ignorant, or just the sense of somebody who's threatened.
That's in a way how we feel, is that we're being compared to, a different species, as you could say, someone that's just different, and we're really the same, like we're no different at all. Other words I've heard, fag, fairy queen, queer, a big time. Now that's a word that I don't really like to be heard. I mean, I know that is one of the technical terms that are used, but to me I feel that is a bit more hurtful, like you queer, like it's more represented in a way of demeaning somebody.
You fag, fagette,
lesbo.
But within the disabled community, it's very homophobic, which is ironic because we live a life of difference, so one would think you would be more accepting of difference. Not the case, from what I've experienced anyway. I mean, I lost a close friend due to homophobia, and she looked at me and said, "Why would you choose that? Why would you choose to be gay?" So I looked at her and said, "Do you think if it was a choice, I would choose to be an effing disabled lesbian?" She walked out of my house and I haven't really spoken to her since.
And I think that we all have it too. I mean, I know that I must have it because I'm afraid to be who I am in lots of places.
All of those gay students who are sitting there, who are going to have friends who are gay, who have relations who are gay, and they listen to those kind of comments, I think, all the time. And that's homophobia.
All of the rest of the world is like me as a heterosexual man, and therefore their views, everyone must think like me. And so for me to make that assumption is just wrong.
I think that's just the term we use when somebody assumes that heterosexual norms are the only norms and judges other people according to them, people who may not adopt those norms for themselves.
Heterosexism is a form of bigotry that very much identifies with heterosexuality as opposed to homosexuality or any other forms of sexuality.
Heterosexism, that is people who are like really gung-ho about heterosexuals, I think.
Heterosexism is a dominant train of thought towards heterosexual dealings, couples, language, terminology, all of those things.
The assumption that everyone is straight and that everybody has a mom and dad. I myself have been in courses, and immediately, particularly because I have a child, everyone assumes that I'm married to a man, and I think that assumption is just there all the time.
Heterosexism means to me privilege. It means big privilege, that people make assumptions that everybody is like them and that life is the same for everybody and that there is no discrimination, and it's a very invasive way of life, I think, for those of us who don't live in that world.
I'm finding that a lot of people are actually kind of getting over it, becoming more of respect to it, not necessarily accepting it, but at least respecting it.
I've had the great, I think fortune in my own life of living on a street that's about 30% gay couples, and many of the heterosexual couples on the street have children, and they know that the men who live together as couples and the women who live together as couples are couples, right? They know that from the age of 3 or 4. And those children, it's a wonderment to grow up and see a first generation of kids who are not homophobic. They're not, and when they hear things in school like the word fag, they come home and they say, well, I don't understand why it's a bad word because Lynn and Debbie who live across the street are really wonderful people, and why are they calling them bad names like that? Or Trevor and Mike who live there are great guys, why are they calling them those bad names? And it's such a wonderful thing to see a generation of children being raised like that. And for all intents and purposes, we know that those children will grow up healthier and more resilient than the children of our generation who had to grow up with misinformation about who we are. We know that those children will grow up in a much different way, a much more positive way. So we should start teaching them at a very, very young age, very young age.